I respect that. Bothers me greatly when the book adaptation and the movie adaptation are not necessarily faithful. But we've got Harry Potter. So let's talk briefly about some genetic traits that show up in this. You've seen the movies, you read the books. What are some examples of inherited genetic traits that get described real clearly in that magic? The existence or lack thereof of magical ability. Magical ability certainly seems to be a genetic trait. I mean, the movie itself, or the world of Harry Potter doesn't do a great job of explaining why you could have a non-magical person born to magical parents, or where you get a magical child from an inherently non-magical family. I don't know how that happens. Maybe those are mutations. We don't know. But magical ability absolutely certainly seems to be an inherited genetic trait in the wizarding world. What about some physical ones? Red, who said that? Red hair. Who are the red-haired people? Actually, I'm not going to say red hair. I'm going to say hair color. Oh, you are. Hair color. Because you've got some characters. You've got the Weasleys with their red hair. There is a... Oh, yeah, Vikram? We'll come back to more. I want to continue to talk about the hair for a second. If you've seen the movies, I think back to that very first interaction when they first get to the castle. They meet kind of a snotty punk kid, and he very clearly identifies Ron as being part of all of the Weasleys due to a number of characteristics, one being the red hair. That snot-nosed character immediately gets identified as being who? Draco Malfoy. Why? Because he's platinum blonde. He looks just like his parents. But the Malfoys aren't all the same. If you think back to the movie, Draco's mom had what color hair? Black. Draco's dad had that platinum blonde, just like Draco did. And so there's different hair traits that are popping out there. Blonde versus black. Mom had black hair. Dad had blonde hair. Draco also had blonde hair. What other traits show up as physical descriptors in the world of Harry Potter? Physical descriptors. We'll talk. Personality gets more complicated. Yeah. The need for glasses. You betcha. So eyesight, yeah. You don't like this color? Okay. Let's try this color. Harry and Dad need glasses. Is that blue any better? What if I make it bigger? Does that help at all? If we make it lighter? Kind of better? Okay. I'll get rid of teal. I'll stay away from teal. Okay, what else? What other physical characteristics get described as observable traits in Harry Potter? There's some traits that you guys possess right now that I can see. Some of you have on your face, some of you do not. Freckles and the lack thereof, or not. Freckles are another one of those traits that are typically associated with the Weasleys. Where am I going here? I do want this greenish color. There we go. What else? What about some other characters? Yeah. Who? Luna. Luna has, yeah, this is the same idea. The hair that matches her dad, you bet. Here are some quotes from the first book, Harry Potter, and depending on if you're American or North American or European, either Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone. Draco Malfoy is quoted as saying, "All Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford." Harry is described as having a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, bright green eyes. Green eyes are a recessive trait; they're very rare. Draco is described as a pale boy with a pointed face and white blonde hair. See, and this is where the book and the movie kind of depart, because it says here that Draco greatly resembled his father. His mother was blonde too, chapter 8 of The Goblet of Fire. But in the movie, Narcissa Malfoy is portrayed as having black hair. with some blonde streaks in there, yeah. And you should go do that. I thought that was during D block. No, I believe you. Go for it. Do what you got to do. There is another fairly significant character who inherits traits from his mother and his father. Not Dumbledore. You're close. He is not as tall as he could be, but he's way taller than he should be. No. Hagrid. What is Hagrid? He's not a giant. His mother was a giant. His father was a normal person. How that worked out, I don't know. I don't know how giant mom didn't immediately kill Hagrid's dad, but she didn't. Was he another half? He might have been. But dad was not full giant. Mom was full giant. So Hagrid was a lot bigger than your average human, but not as big as his brother Grop was. In what book was that? Was that The Goblet of Fire? Does Grop show up? His full giant half brother. You don't remember this? Okay. Well, that's why he's resistant to magic. Giants are typically resistant to magic. So size or height, things like Hagrid, half giant. So there's things that, I mean, you read the book, you see the movies, you don't stop to think about it, but I mean, the examples of genetic inheritance are all around us. So we're going to look at two. We're going to look at freckles and hair color as we look at a tool developed for the study of simple genetics called the Punnett square. So freckles. There are two possibilities for freckles. What are the two possibilities, observable possibilities for freckles? Nothing to do with freckles. If we're talking about freckles specifically, what are the two options that you could see on someone? Not color-wise. Either the freckles are there, or they're not. Like, that's it. Some people have a lot, some people have more than others, but either the freckles are present or the freckles are not. How they're present, if they are, is another story, but either they're present or they're not. So those are the observable phenotypes. No freckles. Freckles. Is the first one that we're going to look at here. Freckles are they really seem to be a dominant recessive, simple gene code. I was reading earlier, it says freckles are tied to a gene called the MC1R gene. I don't know where that is in the human genome, but it's there. There's a gene for freckles. And a genotype for freckles is indicated by two possible alleles in one of the genes that causes freckles. The possible alleles using the first letter of the trait are either capital F or lowercase f. And freckles do seem to be a dominant trait. If freckles show up, they seem to continue. So we're going to have big F, the dominant one, dominant trait. We will say that is freckles. And little f is recessive. There are no freckles. We're writing the word freckle an awful lot here. And of course, the possible genotypes are what? Two big Fs, or two small Fs, or a big F and a small F. You guys have seen this now on your dragons a whole bunch of times. So the phenotype for the first one would be freckles. Second one would be freckles. The third one would be no freckles. And I've gotten to the point where I'm starting to look at the word freckle and it's like, what does that word even mean? You guys have experienced this where you write or see a word so many times it loses all meaning? And as you should have seen with your dragons, one dominant allele, there should be an N in there, one dominant allele is sufficient for its trait, in this case freckles, to be observable, but both alleles have to be recessive for the recessive trait no freckles to be observable. Some of you have experienced this in really big ways with your dragon. Josiah was lamenting earlier. His dragons are lots of the dominant traits in Josiah's pet dragon were the dominant gene, or the dominant expression, but most of his genotypes were heterozygous. So his child was affected by mating with Liam's dragon, who had a lot of those recessive traits. And so even though Josiah's dragon had a lot of those dominant traits, the child for that dragon has a lot of the recessive traits because of in this case, the flipping of the domino led to purely recessive genotypes. When you're ready, flip the page. Let's talk about red hair. There are multiple genes that determine hair color. In one of those genes, red hair is recessive to brown hair. I mean, it's not a clear-cut, hair color is not a clear-cut single gene, because there's all sorts of different shades. You look at my hair on any given day, I mean, I think it looks like I'm more brownish hair. But if you see my hair at the end of the summer, it looks a lot more red. The way the sun interacts with it, it seems to change color. So hair color is a lot more complicated. Red hair, though, in one of these genes in particular, is recessive to brown hair. And one way to describe these hair color alleles is we're going to use the letter R for red hair. Red hair then would be lowercase r. Brown hair then would be uppercase R. So big R denotes dominant brown color. Red hair would be little r, recessive. So let's fill out there's nothing wrong with being a ginger. Embrace the gingerness. R, little r. Fill out the phenotype. Brown, red. See, if anything, Luca's got more mahogany hair. Mahogany is a kind of wood. It's brown with like a tinge of possibly red. But it's mahogany, it's not red. You're not a ginger. You're a mahoganyist. So the question then becomes, and I hope your answer at this point is yes, is it possible to predict what traits offspring will receive from their parents? Yes, you've seen this with your dragons. There is a tool that has been developed to help us at least make predictions. The tool is what's called a Punnett square. When you have what's called a monohybrid cross, you are crossing two, so in this case you had dragons, and your dragons were all monohybrids. It was this trait or this trait. It was this trait or this trait. Like there wasn't a lot of blending, it was one or the other. So Punnett squares can be used, this guy here, this tool, can be used to determine the probability of allele combinations from particular parental crosses. So what is probability? Based on your current understanding of that word, what does it mean? The likeliness of something happening. I like that word, likeliness. So what the Punnett squares allows us to do is it determines the probability of these things. It allows us to predict the probability for each individual offspring, at least a little, to have a certain allele genotype or phenotype. You guys did it with coin flips. This is a little more direct. Just like a coin flip, though, each individual offspring is, there's a word that goes in here. Are your coin flips related to each other? If I'm flipping a coin, a fair coin, and I get heads, does that determine what, if I flipped it again, what the next result would be? No. They are unconnected. Now, your gut says, if I flip a whole bunch of heads in a row, what does your gut want to say? That tails is due, right? You're like, oh, he flipped heads so many times in a row. Tails is gonna come up. I'm gonna start gambling. This is called the gambler's fallacy. In reality, does anything that I have flipped up to this point have any sort of bearing on how the coin will flip next? No. Well, the result of one is not related to the other. Though you might say the probability is starting to stack. It does not work that way for a fair coin. Results that have happened in the past have no bearing on what happens next. It's the same thing I've done in the past with multiple choice tests. You guys start to get suspicious if you have multiples of the same answer in a row on a test. But, especially if I give you a Scantron. Or you start to notice that the answers that you've answered are starting to like draw a pattern on your Scantron, students start to get suspicious. When in reality, does one question have any bearing on a subsequent question? Unless, like in math, sometimes you need to get an earlier part right to get the next part right, but really, on a purely multiple choice test, there's no bearing. One should not impact the result of the next. So, just like a coin flip, each individual offspring is independent. Independent. I never remember if it's ENT or ANT, so I'll go with ENT. Independent of the others. Just because the probability exists that you have a particular trait does not guarantee that your sibling will carry the same trait. They might. And especially if you come from a family with a lot of kids, you might start to see these different traits popping up. But if you've only got one or two siblings, or worse yet, you've got none, you're not going to have any sort of bearing on the probability of the traits that have shown up in your family or not. So, some notation, review of notation. Yes. Oh, Lamise. There's 8 minutes left in the block. Can you survive? If you can survive, I'd love it if you could try. If you don't think you can, then go. So, dominant alleles, represented with a capital letter. Recessive alleles, put your phones away, guys, represented with a lowercase letter. Genotypes. Hey, shh. Malik, stop talking. Genotypes. Both letters represent a combination of alleles in an individual. So it could be big T, big T, big T, little t, little t, little t. Some of us were still struggling with this with our dragons. The genotype needs to have both letters. And typically, just like in chemistry, there's rules for which letter goes first. Typically, we use the first letter, not always, but typically, the first letter of the dominant trait, which we didn't in the red hair color thing because red was recessive. We should have used what letter to represent recessive or the red hair? B, big B and little b. Little b being red hair. Okay, flip the page. I'm going to show you how this tool works. So case 1, freckles. Here is language we're going to throw down here. Punnett square, freckles, case 1. Mom has freckles, dad has no freckles, and somehow we know that each parent has a homozygous genotype. The two alleles in the gene are the same. So, what are the genotypes for mom and dad? Vikram. Mom has to have 2 big Fs. Because we said that mom has freckles and a homozygous genotype. So mom is big F, big F. Dad has no freckles. The only way for dad to have no freckles is if he has what genotype? Lowercase f, lowercase f. So then, we're going to use this Punnett square to predict what trait the kids are going to have. So what we do is we put one parent on one side. We're going to put, in this case, we'll put dad on the left. We'll put mom's genotype up top. One allele in each square. So mom would be big F, big F. Dad's going to be little f, and then every child is going to be a combination of mom's genotype and dad's genotype. Instead of flipping coins, we're just going to fill in the squares. So they're going to get big F from mom here and little f from dad here. They're going to get big F from mom, little f from dad here. Down here, they're going to get big F from mom, little f from dad, big F, little f. So what can you tell me about what the kids will look like? Every single child from this parent combination will have a dominant freckle gene, which means every kid will have freckles. But every kid is heterozygous. So is it possible that these kids would have kids themselves without freckles? Is that possible? Yeah, because they would just need someone else who's heterozygous, or in the most extreme case, homozygous recessive, for the lack of for the freckle trait to disappear entirely. But as it stands, every kid in this family is going to have freckles in the first generation, or in this generation. Interesting. Next. Freckles case 2. Both parents have freckles. Both parents have a heterozygous genotype. So what are the genotypes from a mom and dad? You got to be more specific than FF. Uppercase and a lowercase. We are told that they are both heterozygous and both have freckles. So both parents have to have the dominant allele, but if they're heterozygous, both parents also have to have the recessive. So let's do the Punnett squares again. Dad will put on the left, mom will put up top. So big F, little f, big F, little f. So what are the combinations now going to look like in this Punnett square? What are the combinations going to look like in this Punnett square for heterozygous mom and dad? First one's going to be uppercase, uppercase. Top right is going to be upper, lower, bottom left, upper, lower, and then lower, lower. So then, what are the chances a child would have freckles in this family? What are the odds? Dennis, I heard your voice first, or was it Josiah? It's not going to be 50-50. Malik. 3 out of 4. Soham just is going to keep saying it until I acknowledge Soham. And yes, Namrat, I did hear you earlier. 3 of 4 freckles. 1 of 4 no freckles. So sometimes we show it as a fraction. Sometimes we show it as a percentage probability. 3 of 4 is what percentage? This amounts to a 75% chance a child in this family will have freckles. 1 in 4 is a what percentage chance? 25%. There is a 25% chance any given child will have no freckles in this family. Then if you were to gamble, you'd have a 3 in 4, for every single kid individually, you'd have a 3 in 4 chance that kid would have freckles. So they could all actually not have freckles. In each case, it would be, and again, siblings are not affected by what happens in a previous sibling. So if all 4 of you at that table were brothers, and you had this scenario, and all of you ended up with no freckles, again, the odds of each one of you is unrelated to each other, but you would all then beaten the odds. You'd all have a 1 in 4 chance of no freckles. So if you come from parents, this is the last thing I'll say, then you can pack up. If you come from parents that have freckles and you do not, that means there has to be heterozygousness in your parents' genetic code for freckles. You may pack up. You have no homework from me today other than finishing the dragon. I want the dragons at the start of class tomorrow. When the bell goes, you may also go have a good day.